Hello my loves, and welcome back to this here little bookish corner of the internet. Happy 2019. As I speak to you right now, it is the 1st of January here in Paris, and I thought it would be a good time for me to come to you with a tag that I was tagged in. I think it's called the 2018 Postscript tag, and Adam from Memento Mori created it and he kindly tagged me in it a couple of weeks ago. I hope you've all had an amazing Christmas and not found the whole thing too stressful. If this season is something that you ordinarily find stressful, it can be a bit overwhelming and a bit too much, but it's also really beautiful. I had a really good time here in Europe with my family, and it's nice to be home and surrounded by everyone that I love. And now I'm in my second favourite city in the world, which is always nice. Trivia, if you know my first favourite city in the world, that means you know me pretty well. This 2018 Postscript tag is kind of a nice way to reflect on what I've read in 2018 and bring to your attention some of the books that I have read but haven't wrapped up, which is quite a lot because I wasn't very good at making videos in 2018. If I keep looking at my phone, it's because I've taken a screenshot of Adam's wonderful face and the questions from his tag. So yeah, I'm not being rude or antisocial, I'm just looking at those questions. The first question is: the longest book you read this year and the book that took you the longest to finish. Now this is an interesting question. Any of you guys who watched my reviews of the Bailey's Prize fiction will know that I felt strongly about one particular book on the list, strongly in the negative sense, which is quite rare for me because I tend to try and stick to stuff that I know I'll like, not in the sense of having like any particular comfort zone, but I'm just pretty sure of myself in terms of my book taste, and I figure that there are enough books in the world to satisfy everyone's varying book taste, so I don't really read stuff that I know is not for me on principle. But that was The Idiot by Elif Batuman, and that is tied for the longest book that I read in 2018 with one of my very favourite books this year, which is called The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. So instead of giving you my angry rant about The Idiot again, you can go and watch that. I'll link it down below if you're interested in what Vix is like when she's angry about a book. I am going to take the opportunity to review briefly The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai, because I think if you've made it to the end of 2018 without reading it, then you have a great pleasure in store for you. It starts in 1985. We follow a character called Yale, and he is attending one of his best friend Nico's funerals. So it chronicles the AIDS crisis. You guys know that I've read a lot of books about the AIDS crisis. I have a lot left to read. It's a period of history that greatly interests me, and a lot of art has been created as a result of it, and I'm interested in that art. So obviously I was going to pick this up, and it also came at my friend Russell's recommendation. So we follow this kind of group of friends as the AIDS crisis hits Chicago, and the ins and outs of their friendship throughout this crisis, and what it means to lose all these people, and what it means to grieve together, and what it means to hold on to those who are still alive. Now, that summary kind of makes it sound like every other AIDS crisis book out there, which is, I appreciate, a horrible way of putting it. But the problem is, because there have been so many books written about this period of history, what happens is that these books can become what feels slightly formulaic, especially if they're written by someone who didn't live through it. And that means that these characters who are going through this horrible illness, this grief, this death, can just become empty caricatures of what we think someone should have acted like during such a horrible crisis. And for me, that is what separates Rebecca Mackai's book from a lot of other books. It is so much about the family that's created through friendship, and it is so much about the strengthening of these bonds through tragedy, and it is so little of this kind of tragedy porn that it could have easily veered off into, in the sense that it's very hopeful, and even though you feel very sad because her characterization is such that you give so much of a shit about these characters, you care so much about them and their stories and what makes them full beyond just being gay and beyond just being sick. And you don't feel like you're kind of just following them through a paint by numbers, get sick, get sicker, dies. And it's, you know, feels so much bigger than that and feels so much kinder in a way. And in that sense makes a point, I think, about friendship. It's also interesting that she chose to set it in Chicago, because I feel like, you know, the focus is often on San Francisco and on New York. And so it's kind of interesting to see that from a different perspective. And it's just clear that she's done her research. The fun thing also is that it has some subplots going on. So as well as 1985 Chicago, we're also in 2015 Paris, when Nico's sister, so the guy who dies at the beginning, that's not a spoiler, is looking for her daughter who's gone missing. And so you kind of have this like semi-detective story as well as the aid story. And the character of the mother is kind of interesting because she was very much alive during the 1985 crisis, and she watched her brother die and also a lot of her friends. And so it's kind of a perspective of a person who wasn't slap bang in the middle of it, but who was so affected by it. It's a book that explores the kind of reverberative effect of grief through generations, but it's also a book that explores the hope and transcendence of friendship and love. I highly recommend it. It took me a bit to get into, which is why it's so exciting that now it's on my list for my favorite books of the year, but I do really highly recommend it, especially if you're interested. It fits into the literature surrounding the AIDS crisis in a really interesting way. So there you go. Second question is a book that you read in 2018 that was outside of your comfort zone. I really struggle with answering this question because I don't really think I have a literary comfort zone. Like, the only thing that would probably make sense is if I started reading like a bunch of incredibly complicated highbrow poetry, or if I started reading a bunch of science fiction. I do really want to read more poetry in 2019, so watch this space. And so I feel like I read widely, and I love it when a book kind of defies convention and does things weird with form and doesn't follow, you know, a specific A to Z way of writing. So struggle to answer that question. Sight by Jessie Greengrass, which was one of the Women's Prize nominated books, which was kind of halfway between an essay and a novel about the politics of pregnancy and motherhood and wanting a child, and about her body and about psychology, and just very thematic, very poetic, not very grounded in one single notion, and very philosophical. Was probably the closest to outside my comfort zone that I could say I read. But I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was really interesting, and I thought it played around with the convention of the novel in a really interesting way, because what is a novel and what's kind of the line between fiction and non-fiction in a lot of ways. So there you go. Pretty bad answer to that question, but also it's called not having a comfort zone. How many books did you reread in 2018? I have a specific anxiety when it comes to rereading books, and that is to do with the sheer multitude of books there are to read that come out every single day. And I already feel really anxious about the fact that I will never read all the books that I want to read in 2019, all the new books, all the books that I haven't got to yet. My room is crumbling with the sheer weight of books that I've bought and not read yet. And so I feel a particular kind of guilt, I guess, when it comes to rereading. So that means that I only read one reread in 2018, and that was the first book of the His Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. We read it together with my husband as an audiobook on a road trip, and we really enjoyed it. I haven't revisited it since I was pretty young since the first time I read it. I think I was about 14. And it was really interesting reading it as an adult with a kind of more pointed understanding of theology and religion and the devil and angels and all this kind of thematic stuff that Pullman is addressing and subverting in the trilogy, because I feel like a lot of that went over my head. But also it just has a really good plot, and I tend to not read books that are super plot heavy, so it was different, but I really enjoyed it, and we do really want to get to books 2 and 3, and then I will finally be able to read The Book of Dust, which is one of those aforementioned books which is sitting on my shelf doing nothing. I'm skipping question 4 because that is favourite reread of 2018, and since I only reread one book, it would have to go to his Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. Well done for winning a prize for which you were the only book nominated, Philip Pullman. I'm sure that hasn't happened to you very often. Question 5 is a book you read in 2018 that you look forward to rereading in the future. This one is super easy. It's a book that I finished a few days ago that I read all in one day, all 300 odd pages of it, and I loved it, and I'm sure that I'll find lovely nuggets to go back to every time I do reread it. That is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. So I have started in the past couple of months listening to a podcast that I love called The High Low, which is hosted by Dolly and her friend Pandora Sykes, who's also a journalist. They kind of discuss pop culture, both the highbrow aspects of it and lowbrow aspects of it. They're really, really smart, really well read. They have great recommendations and just really interesting literary well-spoken perspectives on kind of pop culture and events that are going on in the world at the moment. Dolly has written a book which is basically a memoir, which is weird because she's only 30, and I often thought this kind of newish thing of younger people writing memoirs to be a bit weird and a bit conceited, but this isn't at all. It purports to be kind of about what she's learned about dating, how she feels as a single woman, who she's grown to be as a person, and how her views about love have changed as she's grown older. But ultimately what it is a love letter to her female friends, and specifically her best friend Farley, who she talks a lot about. And for me, the ultimate takeaway that I close the book with is this kind of superhuman strength that is created through female friendships, and how you can often change the world, even if it's just your internal world, with the right girls beside you, which is something that I've often thought to be the case. I have a lot of girlfriends that I've been friends with for 15, 20 years now, and it's a really intense brand of love, and it's a love that changes and grows with you, and you kind of go through a lot of the same ups and downs as in a marriage, arguably, or a romantic relationship. And yeah, it's just about that really intense love and that really intense friendship. And I felt like it was speaking to me directly, not only because Dolly's only 3 or 4 years older than me, so we have a lot of like the same cultural touchstones. She also grew up in England. There's a great section about MSN Messenger and the kind of politics of that, and how we used it when it first became a thing, and how our conversations were kind of dictated by the medium that they happened in. But I also just felt very strongly about what she was saying about the strength of the girls and women around her. So I thought it was beautifully written, and it made me cry and it made me laugh, which is everything I want out of a book and a memoir. So I highly recommend it, especially if you grew up in England and you're kind of in like the 26 to 33 age demographic. I think it will really speak to you. Question 6 is favorite single short story or novella that you read in 2018. So I am still struggling with the short story. Last year I read Jen Campbell's collection of short stories, which I loved. There were many stories in there that I thought were really strong and really poetic and spoke to me as if I was the only person in the room, which is kind of that really exciting and unique thing a book can sometimes do. But this year I haven't read many short stories at all. I have Carmen Maria Machado's Her Body and Other Parties sitting on my nightstand at home in Los Angeles that I really, really want to read. I saw her talk at a book event and found her completely compelling, and the bits that she read were really arresting and confronting. So I look forward to getting to that. But the only real novella that I did read was So Lucky by Nicola Griffith, which you guys, if you've been watching my video, know I absolutely loved. It's about a woman who has just gotten divorced from her wife, and she gets diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it's kind of her navigating this diagnosis and living in a body that is slowly failing and that is not on her side anymore. And it's about how she kind of transforms her rage into activism and harnesses that rage to try and make a difference and help. So you guys know that I loved it. You guys know that it was the first time that I've truly seen myself reflected in a book, and I will link the video where I talk about that particular book down below. But I 100% think that everyone should read it, not only if you're disabled and not only if you know anyone who's disabled. We're severely lacking representation of disabled characters in fiction, and this is exactly what I wanted it to be. So everyone required reading for 2019 if you haven't read it yet. 7 is Mass Appeal, a book you like and would recommend to a wide variety of readers. Adam specifically is going to hate this answer because I know he didn't like this book, and it's impossible to get him to like most any popular fiction. But my answer for this would be Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I doubt you need it recommended to you because I think it was on the NYT bestseller list for a ridiculous number of weeks. In fact, it might still be there. I'm sure I will find that out and put it up on the screen. But and loads of people talked about it. It was like widely talked about. And so when I went into it, I was like a little worried that the hype would be a bit too much, but it wasn't, and I really enjoyed it, and it held me on the edge of my seat. I thought it had really good characterizations. It's about a group of people in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and how their lives intersect. It's about a rich family who have a little like outhouse next to their house, which they rent out to a woman and her daughter who are much less well off than them 1 year, and it's kind of about how all of their lives intersect. It's about adoption, it's about class, it's about culture, it's about that kind of small town whispering thing that happens when everyone has opinions about everyone else, and you kind of like get this sensation that everyone's looking out of their windows and creating little micro stories for themselves about all their neighbors. And I think to me that's the cornerstone of a lot of American lit. Like American lit somehow does that really well. This kind of like small town oppressiveness, this weight that gossip can have, and its kind of presence as a character personified. So I really like that book. I gave it to my mom, I think at the beginning of the year, and she really, really enjoyed it too. So that is one that I recommend and that I think will appeal to most anyone. Question 8 is Specialized Appeal, which is kind of just the opposite of the last question, a book that I liked but would be hesitant to recommend to anyone. This was actually a surprise present from my husband, who heard an interview with the author on NPR and thought that I would enjoy this person's book, and he was right. It's called Like a Mother, a Feminist Journey Through the Science and Culture of Pregnancy, and it's by Angela Garbes. Now, I am kind of fascinated with all things motherhood and pregnancy, especially through a feminist lens. I find it to be a subject which is basically inexhaustible. It's really, really interesting to consider those things, motherhood and pregnancy, through an intersectional lens, how they can differ across cultures, how they can differ across abilities, and what that means in general for us as women, even as non-pregnant women and people. And also, of course, how pregnancy can be an experience that a lot of people can go through even if they don't identify as a woman, which is something that this book touches on. Angela Garbes is a mother herself. She's also a journalist, and so I think that's what made this book such a tour de force for me. She kind of looks at it with the forensic analytical qualities of a good journalist, but also kind of the forward momentum of a feminist who wants to explore these issues and who understands their importance as a woman living in 2018, but also with the kind of lived experience of motherhood and what she might be able to say about the wider culture and questions surrounding pregnancy and childbirth through her own experience. It's really well researched, another one, really well researched. She interviews a whole bunch of her friends who are also mothers and people she knows who may have had completely, vastly different experiences of birth and motherhood. It explores how race intersects with motherhood, especially in America. You'll be horrified by some of those statistics. And it explores, I think, it explores motherhood and childbirth as this amazing thing that the human body can do, and this idea of the human body as a fortress of just like power, and how the world can change if we harness that power in the correct way. It's a really non-judgmental book, as in it doesn't say like everyone should want to be a mother and everyone should experience a drive to become pregnant. It just kind of looks at it in a really scientific way that actually ends up being quite poetic in the conclusions it draws about how pregnancy and motherhood can shift the life of the person experiencing them. The one thing that I would say, there was, I think, a little segment about disabled parenthood and disabled pregnancy, but yet again, as always, even mentioning a whole bunch of other intersections, it didn't stop to consider how the experience of pregnancy and motherhood could be fraught for certain disabled people, and what that means and how we can kind of improve that and talk about that. And that is particularly important to me because one thing that I feel very strongly about is that there's kind of still this general attitude that disabled people shouldn't really necessarily have children, and also this weird morbid curiosity about their sex lives and about how they might carry themselves as a pregnant person. And I think the more we can do in terms of breaking down those walls and talking about it and doing research and proper journalism about it, the better. Who knows, maybe I will do some of it if and when I become pregnant myself. I would like to explore that, and I would like to kind of document it. I think that'd be cool. So, but anyway, if you are interested in that, and it's by no means, by the way, for people who have been pregnant or for people who, you know, are mothers already. I think it can be for anyone, and I think it has a bunch of interesting things to say about feminism in general. Question 9 is going to be a brief one. It asked me to reflect on my year as a bookish content creator. You guys, I didn't do very well in 2018. It was a busy year. I started working a lot on like external stuff, not just my stuff, like actual jobs that I have to report to people who aren't just me. So that's like a different dynamic, because before I was working essentially for myself. And so it's been busy and tiring, not to mention the political dumpster fire that it's also been. Does that remind anyone of the video I made after Brexit happened and after Trump happened, when I was very sad and trying to uplift everyone and make them feel better? It's been a year. I do have some goals on BookTube this following year, and I will be here and I will be talking about books. I have read a lot this year, which has made me super happy. I feel like I'm getting my concentration back slowly but surely. I am committing myself to reading more and more year on year, and that feels good, and it feels like books have burrowed their way even further into my heart, and I've enjoyed watching loads of amazing content creators on BookTube too. I'm not going to be too vocal about my own personal goals for BookTube, because I feel like as soon as I say a goal, then I don't do it. I don't know, that's like a weird thing. If I keep it more private, I think that it's probably more likely that it will actually happen. But I will be here, you'll be seeing my face, and I'm excited about it. So thank you, Adam, for tagging me in this. I'm supposed to tag people. I'm not going to do that because a lot of people have done this tag already, and I've kind of lost track of who has and who hasn't. But absolutely consider yourself tagged if you have reached the end of this video and haven't done it yet, and it is something that interests you. In the meantime, I am going to go and enjoy this wonderful Paris apartment and my wonderful husband, and I will speak to you guys very, very soon, in a couple of days, in fact. I hope you have a wonderful start to 2019, and I am wishing you only happiness this year. Keep reading and keep creating in whatever way you can, and I'm excited to be by your side. What the fuck? That's such a weird ending. I am excited to be by your side, but now I'm gonna go before I dig myself into an even deeper hole. Bye, guys.